All right, and we're live. Okay, hi, I'm Ari from CraftQuest. This is our episode 2, and today we're going to be talking about tropes, cliches, and stereotypes in fiction. And we're just going to be exploring what all of those mean and kind of how they fit in the realm of fiction. So, I'm Ari. I am one of the co-founders of CraftQuest. I also run the blog Ravenous Reads, and I am a writer. Let's go, Vivien.
All right, hello again, everyone. My name is Vivien. I have the YouTube channel called Vivien Reese, and I give writing advice. And I just released my first book, my debut book, over a month ago now, which is crazy because I feel like we were just on here. It didn't feel like a month ago, but yeah, that's me.
Hey guys, I'm Maria, other co-founder of CraftQuest, I guess. Writer, blogger, I don't know. I'm querying right now. It's all a hot mess. But that's me. So on to Megan.
Hi, I'm Megan, which you know from the first video, or if not, now you know. I kind of do a bunch of different things. So I write, I read, I do blog about books, and I also blog about like editing tips and all that fun stuff. So yeah, that's about me.
Hi, I'm Justine Manzano. I co-run Inkwell Council with Megan Manzano, who is is the other person on the chat, and also with Ishmael Manzano. And I'm also a YA writer. I tend to dabble in fantasy, and I'm also querying now while working on outlining a new book. So that's what's up with me.
Awesome. So I guess we'll jump straight into the questions in 1 second. But before we do that, let's talk a little bit about what a trope actually is. We were talking about this a little bit before we went live on the air. So when we talk about tropes, we're talking about like an urban dictionary term that writers use for things that are done to death, basically. Cliche then is something else entirely. But when we're talking tropes, we're literally talking about things that you see in almost every book, in every genre. Every genre has something that has been overdone. So why don't we go down the list, starting with Vivien? What is your least favorite trope, your favorite trope, and how do you define trope?
Okay, so least favorite trope. To me, that would have to be the love triangle. It can be done. It can be done well in some books, but a lot of times it can fall flat really easily. My favorite trope, which I kind of am guilty of a little bit, is the best friend that's like the spunky, fun one. Like there's the main character, if the main character is a book nerd and the best friend can be the spunky, fun one. That's one that I kind of fall into. But yeah, your definition was spot on. Cliched, things that are cliched kind of are in a different category than tropes are. And it's just, tropes can change, obviously, depending on like what's popular and what's being done. So if, I don't know, if dragons are in, there's tropes associated with that, or like fantasy or thriller. So it can change as time goes on. So in 10 years, we're going to have, who knows what tropes we're going to have in 10 years.
Awesome. Megan, same question.
There we go. Hi. Yeah, my mic was taking a second. Okay, least favorite trope, probably the love triangle thing too, just because I found a lot of times it's a bit overdone or it doesn't make as much sense to me. There are really good ones that I do like, but generally whenever I see a love triangle, I get really wary about it. Favorite trope? Okay. Oh God, this is really hard. I do like the idea of like slow burn kind of like relationships where you're building every single chapter to this romance or like a really good kind of partnership. Also the whole like, hey, we're trapped on a mission, so now we're gonna have feelings. Yeah, I really like that one too. And in terms of what a trope actually is, yeah, your definition is right. It's pretty much just, to me at least, things that I see happen over and over again, almost kind of like a pattern. That's kind of how I would describe it throughout certain genres.
I'm going to use two here because my least favorite trope has been taken by everyone else. I hate love triangles, but one of the things that I tend to, I mean, I still like this one, but I try to avoid it, at least in my writing, is the will they or won't they. I kind of want there to be a kind of, I like kind of having an obvious love interest in most of my stuff, where this is totally going to end up being the person. It's just how the hell will they get there, less than that question of whether or not they will be together. That's one thing I do when I'm dealing with romance that I enjoy. But another one that I would say that I like is found families. Almost all of my stories have a found family in it. I think with tropes, I think cliches are the things that are just so eye-rolly predictable, and that's how we can set them apart from a trope. Whereas tropes are things that appear in a lot of the same genre of books. Like you'll have like in young adult, you'll see a lot of like, you know, the rebellion led by a young girl. That kind of a thing is a major trope of the YA genre. But it's not really cliche just yet, I feel like. I don't think it's been done to the point where it's like, oh, it's so predictable. I bet she's going to run a rebellion by the end of this book. Like, I don't think that's really how you feel when you read it. And I think that's the difference. I think that the difference between a cliche and a trope is how you feel when you're reading that.
Okay. I guess my favorite, well, I'll start with my least favorite because everyone already said love triangle, and I do have an issue with the love triangle. My beef with it is mostly that you can predict who they're going to end up with. It's usually they have these instantly strong feelings for one, and then they can't be with that person, so they go over here and they have some feelings for this person. And that's not to say you can't feel attracted to more than one person. You know, you can, but the level of attraction is so clear sometimes in the books that you just know. So that's like one. I do have a second one, I guess. It's kind of like the whole the chosen one kind of thing that's been going on. I think a lot of people are sick of that one too. And that usually sometimes goes with, at least in a lot of books that I've read, with they have hidden secret abilities they had no idea of. It sometimes drives me up a wall because I feel like you should know what's going on in your body. But those are like the two that I don't know what it is. I've been trying to stray away from reading books that continue to do the worn out part. My favorite one, I guess like right now, is when a character really like the love version where you like someone who just doesn't like you back. There's just something nice about that where you know it's doomed to fail, but somehow the cause is worthy in the moment. And I don't know, I really enjoy that part of, you know, the tropes that are going around, that hopeless kind of love, you know, Simon and Clary kind of love. It's never going to happen and everyone knows. As for like what a trope is, I was kind of, believe it or not, I was kind of going with the same thing. I was thinking even more of like a theme, like that's what was strong in my head, is like a theme within the characters or a theme of things that was going on. That's just, you see it so often, you can kind of tell where it's going in a sense, and that's pretty much how I feel about it. How I define it is just like a theme of what's been going on. So everyone already said what I was thinking. Hold on, let me.
Awesome. And I just realized that I didn't give my favorite or my least favorite. So believe it or not, I do enjoy a good love triangle. So I'm going completely against the grain here. Now, only if it's done right and done well. I think someone already mentioned that, like, you know, when it's predictable, when it's like obvious, you know, that they're going to end up with one person, then it gets monotonous. But I do like a really good love triangle where the question, like, it's always up in question who they're going to end up with. As far as least favorite, I think people will agree with me on this one. I am not a fan of the trope where the protagonist is female and she has no idea how beautiful or strong and amazing she is until some guy comes along who's super hot and makes her believe in herself and she can do it. So I see everyone going crazy. Everyone's on mute, but yeah, that's the one for me. I absolutely hate it, and I think it is so wrong for us to perpetuate this idea that we are worth nothing unless some guy tells us that we are. So that's my least favorite trope. So on that note, we'll move on to the first question. This question is from @Margaret_Adele. It comes from Twitter. And the question is, when you first begin plotting the story, how do you avoid falling into cliche storylines or plot points? So I guess I'll go first. Hi, I'm Maria. I'm a pantser, so I don't really plot. So that's about the extent of my answer. However, of course, there are things that I like and I don't like. So for me, I'm pretty good at compartmentalizing. So I have, it's not like I'm going to write a trope by accident. A good way for pantsers out there to avoid them is to, well, of course, Google is a fantastic tool. Also, you know what you like and you don't like from a reading standpoint. So just make a good list and bad list of things bad list of things you want to avoid and good list of things you might want to either utilize or change up a little bit. And as we go through these tropes and these questions, another thing to realize is that not all tropes are bad. You can reinvent the wheel and, make them different, put a spin on it. A lot of the things that we talked about already, I've seen done very well in some books and it doesn't feel tropey. But that's because those writers reinvented what that trope was and took it to a whole other level. So that's my answer for that, I guess. So make a list. Tropes you want to avoid, tropes you like and maybe want to change a little bit. So we'll move on to Vivien. So when you begin plotting the story, how do you avoid falling into cliche storylines or plot points?
I loved your answers. First of all, Google was my answer. Just to be sure that you understand what tropes exist in your genre that you're writing in. I do know some writers who don't actually read that much in the genre that they write in, but it's really important, especially for tropes, that you understand what's being done. And unless you read a lot in that genre, that's where Google can come in and can help you out a little bit, and you can actually look up what tropes exist in your genre. So when you're plotting and you're outlining your story, tropes typically exist. They typically revolve around the characters. So really understanding who your characters are can help you avoid some of those tropes. And sometimes so it's not just, you're outlining your plot. It's actually when you're developing your characters, you can figure out what, if you find yourself falling into a trope, you can kind of dig your way out of it. Like Maria said, if you just reinvent the trope, then you can kind of just dig your way out of that. So you don't actually, you don't have to completely avoid tropes, but for me, I guess my biggest tip is just to really understand who your characters are so that they can avoid tropes.
Megan, same question. How do you avoid them?
Okay, I'm going to give my personal answer, and then I'm going to give my helpful answer because I have two. So my personal answer is that I am an extremely critical person. So if I start writing and find that anything, even to the slightest point, is getting really corny or really rooted in a trope, I'll just be like, this is disgusting, and just kind of burn the entire thing. That's my personal answer. I'm not saying you should follow this because it's very detrimental. My legitimate answer, the one that I hope will be helpful, is read a lot in your genre. Obviously, we don't all have a lot of time. We all have different time schedules, and that can prevent things from happening. But I find that reading in the genre that you want to write or the genre that you are trying to write is more helpful than you could possibly know. You start learning not only about like the patterns that happen in these books, but what is sort of expected of the genre. So I think once you have that under your belt and you do some research, it'll really prepare you for when you're writing your own story in that genre as to like what you should avoid or what's kind of overdone, what you can change to make a trope either better or just, you know, put a whole different spin on it. And I think that's kind of your way of taking a trope that may seem problematic, not problematic, but overdone and make it better. But yeah, do not do my personal approach, doesn't work. But yeah, there you go.
So yeah, Google, and yeah, read a lot. These are important things. Also, if you're writing and you want to do this as a professional, you should always tap into your industry websites, follow agents, follow people who publish the stuff that you read, or that you want to write rather, because they will often tell you what they're sick of seeing, what they, you know, the little, and so it's always good to keep that in the background, not to sit there and plan your story around what Agent A says today, because that's not very helpful. But to kind of keep these things going in the background while you're working, because they keep you aware of what is becoming to be like, what is becoming saturated in the market, what people are starting to get sick of seeing, and what other people are having trouble selling. Those are the things that you kind of want to just kind of know, in case when you're starting to plot something out, you see yourself leaning in that direction, you can pull yourself out of that direction. Personally, I actually had it, you know, even I'm writing my third completed book, or I'm outlining it now. And I started outlining it and realized that I intended to kill off a character. And that character killing that character would have made me, like, thrown me face first into a trope. And I realized it. And so, like, to me, once I meet my characters, I can't really change them. I like who they are. So I ended up having to rearrange a whole portion of my story, because I was like, no, I'm not going to write that story again. That story has already been written. I've read it a gazillion times, and I'm not doing it. Sometimes you can't do that. Sometimes it's essential to your story, at which point you definitely want to try to flip it and make it original for you. But I mean, if you're paying attention and that trope, I've seen more of it through other people being upset about it than me caring, but I was very, very close to tripping and falling into it. And so since I had that in the background of my head, I was like, oh, wait a minute, I'm doing that thing that people complain about. And I was able to switch it up. So that's just something, you know, keep that background noise always going on as a writer. Pay attention to all of the people that are talking. Read reviews of books you like. That's another one that I do. When I like a book and I see other people didn't like it for some reason, I read the reviews and see why they gave it 1 star, because I'm always like, how could you possibly hate this book? This book is amazing. And then usually I see that people get annoyed with certain things that I would have never thought of, that, you know, people are like, oh, I'm so sick of seeing when the girl does this thing. And so it's good to be aware of that, not necessarily to let it dictate you, but just to be aware.
Okay, so like everyone else, I worship the Google gods and hang out on there for all my information. But I want to speak to something that Megan said. With my own work, I'm kind of obsessive. But what I do to avoid throwing it away, because I would get in trouble, would be to just put it in a folder for later. Because I might hate it now, but I might not hate it later. So if you find you're getting stuck in trope loops and you have no idea how to get out, just put it in like a folder, like the ugly folder, I think is what I call mine, the ugly folder. So just chuck it in an ugly folder if you can't deal with it right now. But I read a lot of science fiction and fantasy, and I think it's important, like everyone said, to read the genre that you're writing in, because you will start to see the themes that are going on and the different tropes. And definitely what Justine said, read the reviews and kind of see if there is a common, you know, like thread or pattern to what people are just it's what's not sitting well with them. It'll give you an idea. But it's also important to stay on top of like the current books coming out. For example, I wrote a sci-fi last year. It was hella tropey, like in a way that science fiction now really isn't supposed to be anymore, but that's because I read really old science fiction, like Asimov stuff, you know, not the new stuff that's being written for young adults. So what was acceptable then is not necessarily cool now. So sometimes it's important to kind of read within like the last couple years just to get an idea of what's most recent and what people are reading. I know everyone doesn't like the trending thing, but it's important to see what agents are actually accepting now and not just back then in terms of trope material. So, but yeah, I read up a lot on what people are looking at. I read up a lot on what they have an issue with. I feel like if there's a lot of people, I might do it still if it works with my book, and then later I'll just figure out a way to twist it. Like I believe just everyone else was saying, is to find a way to twist it. So I think it's important to understand that getting your book written first might be a good way to go. And then if you find there are tropes, in my opinion, go back and see if there's a way to rework it in a unique angle instead of getting hung up on it in the beginning. Let me mute myself. Hold on.
Awesome, guys. And actually, as you were all talking, I just thought of 2 more resources that are fantastic for writers. Mostly, well, one's on Twitter, but manuscriptwishlist.org is a fantastic resource. And for anyone that's not familiar with it, it's basically a website that editors and agents utilize. They have a profile in there, and then they update what they want out of a manuscript every couple of weeks, or something pops into their head. You know, they'll update it. So you can go in there and see that, you know, Agent X is looking for a sci-fi that's set in the 1400s, and they'd really like it to be love triangle with a twist on, you know, something in a planet of wherever. So some of them are like crazy, but at least you know what agents are looking for. And you can also follow the hashtag MSWL on Twitter, where agents will update you in the moment when they, you know, when something pops into their head that they'd like to see in a manuscript. The other resource is another hashtag. It's hashtag 10 queries. Spelled out, TEN, not the number. So hashtag 10 queries is where agents take their slush pile on a day that they have some downtime, and they will go through the queries one by one. Well, they only do 10 of them, obviously, 10 queries. But they'll let you know why they passed, or why they also, you know, requested a partial or a full. So that's great too, you know, just something different that you can go on and kind of, you know, see where their head is at. So question number 2. This question comes from @ScottAPetty from Twitter. Are tropes sometimes helpful to stories? I have to think about that one, so I'm going to pass that straight on to Vivien.
So I have I think I stand out from the rest of the gals here because I went the self-publishing route. So with traditional publishing, obviously, I think it's a little more important to avoid tropes in traditional publishing. For self-publishing, you can kind of get away with tropes a little more. It's not as detrimental because you sort of don't have those like tryouts almost of trying to query and trying to find an agent, trying to find a publisher who may be weary of those tropes. But for self-publishing, you can get away with them a little bit more. And that's not to say that it's that they should be used more, but I think, you know, are they to ask if they're helpful to stories? I think it's kind of, if you have, it's not like a full trope, if it's sort of maybe like a half trope, if there is such a thing, it might be helpful to the story if it still moves the plot along and it's not the main focus of the story. If it's not like the main character's trope, maybe if it's like a side character or like a side story, side plot that you have going on, it could be helpful. or if it's maybe like a brief backstory of the villain or something like that, I think it can be helpful. But that's for more self-publishing, I think, is where you can sort of get away with it a little bit more.
Awesome. Megan, what do you think?
Okay, I'm going to say this is very subjective. I'm going to say that any trope used in literature is going to be based on the execution. I think there are definitely some that have lost kind of any, I guess, capability in literature now, like the damsel in distress trope is kind of tossed away. No one ever wants to see it again. Then there's the trope where like a girl falls for someone who is more abusive than actually loving. That needs to go because we've had that in literature for a long time. And so I think those tropes, they need to go. And I think there are definitely other ones that when you kind of see them, you immediately eye roll and kind of put a book down. I think like when we go back to earlier, if you reinvent a trope, I don't think that it will harm you so much. And because it's the execution, it's how you're getting from point A to point B. If you're writing a story that's entirely based on a trope, then yeah, that's probably going to hurt you because you have to go through a certain amount of steps to finish the trope. And we all know what those steps are. I mean, look up like a rom-com. We know what's going to happen. We know all the puzzle pieces. And sure, we watch them and we like them every now and then, but like you could tell they're very formulaic. And I think when you write with a trope or entirely on a trope, your book will be in a way formulaic. If you have characters that happen to either align that way or like it's like Vivien said, where it progresses the plot, it's progressing development. No, it's not going to harm your story, but I think you definitely need to be wary of that. And I definitely think that execution will always be the big difference between if a trope will harm you or not.
I think tropes are best when they're either completely where a plot is sort of ending up in a place where it's not like something you know at the beginning of the story. I think that tropes aren't so bad. I think when you discover, like I was talking earlier about found families, often when you're going into a story, you're not seeing that already from the very beginning. And I think that's where tropes come in, where tropes become a problem, because I consider tropes to be summaries. So if you need shorthand to describe a character, using a trope for a side character it can largely be shorthand isn't so bad. But for a main character or for the main thrust of the story, using a trope makes it instantly like, okay, well, I know how this is going to end up. So that makes it boring. And so it's not a good way of using a trope. But since they're shorthand for certain characters, if you have, background character who is, wise, and you can tell because he's surrounded by books and he has, like, those things are, yeah, okay, it is a little bit of a obvious thing, but it's also not important enough to the story when they're a side character for it to really make you go, oh God, I know where this is going, because it's not so important. So it definitely, it also, like everyone's saying, it depends on how you twist it. You can combine tropes in a way that makes everything different. And that's an interesting exercise. And you could even have fun with that as just a writing exercise if you feel like throwing a bunch of tropes on to a wall and making them stick, but finding a way to make them all stick together. But I feel like you should think of it as shorthand, and your story should not be shorthand. So find a more interesting way if it's a major part of your story.
I definitely think that should be done. I think sitting down and really thinking about different ways that you can present that trope, if it has to stay in your book, if it's a big part of your work in progress, to find an interesting way to twist it, even something minor. It doesn't even have to be that big. Is definitely important. I know that like there's so many different tropes, and I feel like people get hung up on it at the beginning to the point where it prevents them from actually writing stuff down. And I think it's important for people to kind of, I think earlier Vivien, or maybe it was Megan, I'm just going to say everyone said about how it comes down to the characters, and sometimes the tropes kind of have to deal with the characters. So finding a way that your characters stick out and are different or unique might be a good way to find out how to twist the trope. so to speak. I think that they can be helpful to certain kinds of books. I think some books people read for comfort, and having a trope in sort of comfort reads is a good thing. But for the most part, I think finding a refreshing take, at least for me as a reader, is best. There's some things that are just overdone to the point where it's coming. I can't tell you how many times I open up a book and suddenly they fall in love and everybody's magically changed in like 20 pages. The bad guy is suddenly a good guy, and we it goes with the theme that love can change and conquer all, but what if it didn't? I mean, it's that what if that I really enjoy. So I think it depends on your audience, like who you imagine to be reading your book, whether a trope will really work for you or not. I feel like in for example, some cozy mysteries I used to read, they have some pretty darn good tropes in there, but it's a cozy mystery for a reason. And, it's sometimes they're done in such a subtle way that it actually works. And you still, for whatever reason, you just don't see it coming. At least I don't. Maybe I'm a cat when I read, like, don't have any idea it's coming, but it all comes down to like who's reading your book and whether or not they'll feel it's overdone in your genre. And so just find a natural way. Don't force it. Just try to find a natural angle, I guess, is the best way to avoid trope overload, in my opinion, and it could work. Of course, there are no guarantees. I'm one of those people. I live by the edge. There are no guarantees that anyone will like it or that everyone will like it or that, but it's just find what works for you and what you can live with and see if it works, and you're good.
I kind of wanted to jump in really quick and sort of go off of what you're just saying, because I was saying like self-published authors can kind of get away with tropes a little bit more. I think part of that is because there are still people who are totally trash for some tropes. Like, I mean, they love it. So there are some writers who it's harder to query agents and to go through the traditionally publishing route and sort of get away with that. But there are some people who still absolutely love to read those things. And if they see a book that's tropey, they kind of like search for those on Amazon. But I just wanted to add that really quick.
And Vivien, you're absolutely right. Because, I think, going the traditional route that the rest of us are going in, it's almost now, and Ari and I talk all the time. She like talks me off a cliff edge, like at least once a day. So, like right now, I finished my last manuscript. I'm querying it, and I'm going back and forth between these two new manuscripts. I don't know which one to choose, because it's like I'm trying to almost like look into a magic 8-ball and figure out which one is going to be the one that, will get me, that will land me that agent. And it's so difficult. And you are so right, because I am one of those people that likes to go on BookBub, and I like to look for my Regency romances. And I'm sorry, but she's spunky and he's rich and, very aloof, and eventually they fall in love and everything's fantastic. So that's my comfort go-to. So that's definitely, you are so right, because it's like, if you're going the traditional route, you have to have like a new spin on something. You have to be fresh. It has to be something they haven't seen before. So for a lot of writers, self-publishing is the way to go. And, one of the genres that, is kind of popular right now are the fairy tale retellings. Agents love them. Editors are eating them up. Readers are, just buying these books. But one of the things that I've noticed is it's so easy to fall into the trope category for something like a fairy tale retelling. And then you have so many out there that do it so well, it's like not even funny. But you can see, how these people landed these deals because they're different. They took a trope and they flipped it on its head. And I think, like I could name out a few of them right now that just, they shocked me, and the girl didn't get the guy, and, it was fantastic. So, it's one of those things where, and we've said it already, it has to be fresh. There has to be a twist on it. So can a trope be helpful in writing? Absolutely. And, I think some of the best twists on a trope is when the reader thinks we're about to read a trope, and then it gets flipped on its head with this amazing plot twist, about halfway through, and we go, oh damn, like it's just one of those things where it shocks you. And that's really what that keeps the reader interested. And, at that point, then you're page turning. What the hell is going to happen? What do you mean she's not going to end up with this guy, or, whatever the case may be. So yeah, tropes can be helpful, but like everyone said, there has to be a new take on it. So the third question, in your opinion, is it possible to avoid tropes, or are they present in all works of literature? Okay, so someone said it earlier, I think it was Ari talking about, what was popular 20 years ago versus what's popular today. And here's the thing, you can go all the way back to the classics. They started the tropes. You can go all the way back to the classics, and, you can even look to 20th century literature, all the way up and into, modern literature. Tropes are life, if you want to put it that way. It's not like we can go through life and just not have relationships, or, not interact with anybody ever. And, sometimes, like, it's some of it's real life, some of it is, just ridiculous, but I don't feel that you can completely avoid a trope, because these are things that are done to death, but they are done to death because either readers love to read them, like Vivien said, or, they're things that people relate to in real life, because these things have either happened or they've happened to a friend of theirs. And, so I personally feel that you can't completely avoid them, but what you can do is eliminate the ones that you absolutely hate, and, develop the ones that you love, so that the reader will then love it as well. Vivien, what do you think?
I think I liked what you said about getting rid of the ones that you hate. And I think going further into that, that's where it would be really helpful to talk to people that are in the genre, and maybe, I don't remember who it was that said it, but reading reviews on a book and understanding if they find something too tropey. So maybe utilize that list and see which ones readers tend to hate, because what you hate obviously might not be anywhere near what your genre is tired of hearing. So if you have that list and have those sort of be your blacklist, like you want to avoid all of those in your writing, I think that is definitely a good tip. But yeah, I think that tropes, they exist because, like you said, they're really relatable. People, they became tropey because of a reason. And I think tropes are kind of like fashion trends. So what's in right now is not going to be the same thing that's in 5 years, and it's going to be totally different. So what's, maybe a good tip too. So if you can't avoid it, maybe sometimes don't worry about maybe writing that specific manuscript right now, because maybe in a couple years, like a lot of writers don't like to do that. They don't like to put a manuscript on the back burner. But if it's one of those burning ideas that you have, maybe that can be helpful if it's kind of tropey right now, as long as it's not one of the big tropes that's really overdone. I would try not to hesitate to maybe put it off a little bit longer and then maybe develop that a little bit more. But I do think tropes, like, I feel like there's almost different degrees of tropes. There's those maybe red category tropes that are just like the really big ones that are done so much right now. And then there's the yellow, cautionary tropes, maybe like that. I feel like there's different levels of them. So depending on the level, I think every story has them. So Megan, over to you.
Yeah, I'm going to agree and say I don't think it's possible to get rid of tropes from your writing. Tropes, like we're all kind of saying, they're kind of ingrained in you in some way, especially if you read. So I think no matter what's going to happen, you're kind of going to not necessarily stumble into one, but I think they're always going to be at the back of your mind, especially depending on what kind of story you write. I do like the idea of what Vivien said, that there are different levels of tropes, that maybe you should be maybe like, okay, throw ones away that are kind of like in the red, and then yellow, like, okay, maybe I can work with this and kind of spin it around. I think it's just like if you go into a story and go, okay, I need to avoid all tropes ever, you're going to hit more brick walls than you could possibly ever imagine. I think you just kind of have to let it happen. And if you find in your story that things are not going right, or you're tipping into something, you're not like, guess what? You can edit it. I mean, that's kind of where we stand. So I think if you put too much pressure on, I need to avoid this trope and everyone hates this, so I can't do that, you're not going to get anything done. So I think you just kind of have to go for it, see what happens, and you can always cut it out later or throw it in the ugly folder that Ari mentioned a while ago, because I need one of those.
So we all, I think when Maria said that life is a trope is life, that really hit on the head, because we all know that one person who is flaky and never shows up for a thing on time, and they're still our friends and they're really great people, but they just don't arrive on time ever, and you set your clock like 10 minutes later, like when you go to meet them, like, oh yeah, I'll go at 9:10 because they'll be there at 9:10. Like, and we all know, you know, that one guy that's kind of a jerk, who, like, you know, I have a bad term for this. I'm not going to use, but okay, so you get my point. We all know, like, certain types of people. We all know certain types of things that happen in lives, in our lives, that just tend to happen when you reach a certain age. Now, not to the point of stereotyping, but we all know somebody like, you know, like A or B. And I feel like tropes are sort of the same way. They bring us to a place that we recognize. And that's why I was saying before, it's like sort of a shortcut, because it's something that feels familiar. And so it's not necessarily a bad thing. Like this is, you know, this old familiar idea that we're visiting. And while it can be kind of, you know, dangerous, we can skirt a dangerous edge there between it being a cliche and it being just an accepted trope. As long as we pay attention to what we're writing, is like everyone else is saying, like, go back, read again. If you're getting eye rolly, if you feel like things are really predictable all of a sudden, you've probably tripped into one of the red level tropes. Yellow level tropes are maybe like, okay, let's see how we can steer away from this. But you know, you will recognize some things in every story because they are familiar, they're relatable, and they're why we like stories. So there will always be some old familiar pieces that you revisit.
I just want to say, in terms of what Vivien said, I actually found this website that looks at all sci-fi tropes, and they actually categorize them red, orange, and green. Red being don't you dare touch it. Orange being it's been overdone a lot, but maybe you could do it better. And then green was people still use this, but we haven't seen it in a while. And yeah, they actually have a website where it's all categorized, and it's seriously like 3 pages of science fiction tropes. So as Megan said, if you sit there and you worry about it, you're never going to write anything. You're never going to get, because I mean, 3 pages for science fiction, God, what must fantasy look like? What, you know? And sometimes, you know, if your book is done well and you have a couple tropes, it doesn't seem to matter. So I really wouldn't worry about it until you go through and edit. Don't get hung up on, oh, well, I can't write it this way because the agents might hate it or everyone might not read it. Because if you really think about it, like Maria said, life is trope. Everything is kind of tropey in its own way. So there's no way to avoid it entirely. There's going to be a trope hidden somewhere in your book, tucked away. Someone will find it and someone will hate it. And you just got to live with that. You know, life gives you tropes. You make something else out of it, or move on. Do not know where I was going with that, but
like you make a novel.
Yeah, when life hands you tropes, you write a novel. It's gonna be.
Then there's the side point. There's the side point of if you don't have anything familiar, people also hate it. So I mean, you fall into the hole either way.
Yeah, on that, actually, I read an Octavia Butler book ages ago that was so bizarre and out there that I kind of liked it, but it alienated me a lot like it did the main character, and it kept me from completely loving the book because it was so foreign and different, and it was hard for me to relate to anything in this book other than the desperate need to flee, which I felt for the characters. Like, just get off the ship. Don't believe them the Earth is gone. I don't believe them. You know, if there's nothing familiar, it's really hard to latch on and kind of feel a little comfortable. And I think if you start out with a bit of a trope, that's fine. You want them to feel comfortable, so later you can just throw them for a whammy. So don't worry about it. Do not beat yourself up over it. Just put your freaking book in physical form and then go back and cope with it later and have your meltdown privately, or, you know, tweet me and I'll help you.
Awesome. And you know, it's kind of funny that you mentioned that, because you know, we talked about beginnings last time, making it all up, and you know, that's one of the things for anyone that has queried out there before that this is not their first rodeo. Some of the rejection that you get is along the lines of, you know, that they couldn't connect with the character, tying it into voice and everything. But you know, piggybacking off of Ari's you know, statements, that's something that's also really important. Like, you know, a trope can connect your audience to the character because they see something in themselves, you know, in your character. So just something else to think about, you know, as you're going through. So, and, you know, like Megan said, like Ari said, you'll never get it finished if you don't just, you know, keep going. Just identify the ones you need to avoid, and just write the damn book. Just write the damn book and you'll get it done. So we didn't really talk a whole lot about, excuse me, cliches. So I just want to go around really quick. Everyone give your most hated cliche ever, and I will start. The one that I hate the most is when a book begins with a dream. I hate it. I hate it, and it's so done to death. Vivien, what's yours?
Definitely that one. I think we can all say we hate that one. Or when a character looks in a mirror to, like, for the writer to describe them. That one gets me every time. Megan.
I'm gonna go with something Maria said earlier. Kind of the whole, I'm not that pretty and I'm so plain and boring and, like, look how not pretty and not interesting I am. But oh, there's this boy who's kind of mysterious and brooding. He must, like, then he likes me. Oh, maybe I am so pretty. And I was like, oh my God, why are we at this point? And you could see it coming. You could always see it coming.
Starting with the weather. It was a dark and stormy night. Thus, bad things are about to happen. Or it's sunshiny and happy. If you know what, if it's a dark and stormy night, it better be the happiest night of your life. if it's sunshiny, make bad things happen. But really, don't start with the weather. Get there after. Bring us into the story first, because it always ends up being this. And this is how you set the novel. It feels really heavy-handed as an author, so, like, don't do it. Unless you can do it interestingly.
I have many, because I like to complain, but then I also like to read the things I then complain about. So definitely the weather, definitely the dream. In fact, I made that mistake once, and I hated myself. I don't like prologues unless they're super important. If you get, like, I've read a book and I liked the book, but it had a prologue, and I just remember I got to the end of the book, I'm like, why the hell did I have to read the first 5 pages? I don't get why this is here. I don't understand why that person was important. It doesn't seem to relate back in. That kind of, you know, so extraneous stuff thrown in the beginning before you get me to the other stuff, just for the simple purpose of drawing me in, and then your first chapter is, I don't even know what. That's a definite. I don't know, it rubs me wrong, especially when the tone is different. You start out with doom and gloom, which I really like, running for your life kind of stuff. And then it's all a sunny day in chapter 1. There's a jump, and I'm not sure how that happens. So definitely those. I would have to say that the pretty girl is on my list, the looking in the mirror, because there are so many more interesting ways that you could describe your character other than looking in a mirror. And and oh god, I could keep going for days. But like I said, even though I hate on these, I also read these because I try to find ways to overlook some of them if the book is pretty good. So I try to be like, okay, I'm just gonna pretend that this wasn't written, and I'm just gonna move on. But definitely, like, especially with relationships, girl's not very pretty, likes hot guy. I think that one's really high up. Or when everybody's pretty in the book, actually, when everybody is gorgeous, and all the men and all the women and even the old people and the young people, and I really just want a character to say, God, your baby is ugly. Like, I just want someone to say something that I feel in real life it would be done, because I just feel like there should be, well, like Maria said, it's life. There should be variety. You should have non-skinny characters. You should have characters that are struggling with personal problems. You should have people who are a hot mess. You should have ugly men. Like, it's a crime that you have all these gorgeous men. Like, I think it's a crime. You should have a girl who's plain and is pretty cool with that. Like, you should have all these things, and I feel like I'm gonna stop now because I'm just going on a roll.
You know what? Great point. Where are my chubby heroes? I just want to put that out there. Like, seriously. Well, like real life, I'm actually pretty close to 6 feet tall. So for me, I really don't give a crap what a guy looks like so long as he's taller than me. So how about we have protagonists like that are like, oh my God, come here, you chubby guy, I love you. What's the problem? That's real life, So I was going to say something else that was super profound or something, and I can't remember because I just got stuck on my tall guys. I mean, what can you do? Oh, yes, this is what I was going to say. So since we talked a little bit about the cliches, and I think actually the one Vivien gave is probably the one that irks me the most, about looking in the mirror and giving the author an excuse to, tell everyone how fabulous this person is, and their almond-shaped eyes, and the amazing glints of their irises with the hazel and the green. So a couple of ways to avoid doing that completely. One of the things I like to do, now I haven't always done this, but something I do enjoy doing is not describing my character at all, and allowing the reader to almost superimpose themselves on the character. So it's like an instant connect. Does anyone else have anything that they like to do to avoid, the whole looking in the mirror thing? Because I know that's a huge, huge problem out there, and people definitely have issues with, describing the character. Anybody?
Don't do it all at once. Parse it out. Your description should never be a laundry list of things that this person is. And I looked at the mirror at my dark hair and brown eyes and cute little button nose. It should never be like that. I mean, you can find many different ways of not doing that, but just don't do that. One thing though is that I personally do is I work it throughout, pushing her hair off her shoulders and describing her hair at that moment. Having, other things happen that require you to mention the fact that she has brown eyes, which may never happen. But another character might mention it. And then it never has to be a description that comes from a heavy-handed narrator. It can be this character saying, your eyes are so blue, which is really, really cliche now that I hear myself, but you get my point.
I'm going to jump in on this too. Are you good, Justine?
Yeah.
Okay. My favorite thing, I try to do it, but I fall in love when other people do it, is when the details are kind of involved in some sensory stuff, or the relationship to another person somehow describes them in a way. If they have their brother and people are always oh, well, you and your brother don't look alike, or things like that, or kind of just oh God, I don't even know, going through whatever they're doing, and somehow in those details of the plot or description or the nature or whatever, you also get stuff about them. I can't think of an example right now, but I always love it so much.
I've got one. So if
So-
you are walking with somebody who is taller than you and you are looking up at them and it's coming from that point of view, you can say, I looked up to blah, blah, blah. And now we know this person's shorter. Obviously not as, in a much artsier way. Find a better way to say it than I did. But you get the point. Like when you're dealing with, you know, if you regularly walk into a room and everyone's shorter than you, then I know you're tall. And that's a way to relate, to write it relationally to the other people in the scene without having to look at yourself and go, and this is how I look. You know how different you are from other people, or the things about you that might stand out that aren't like everyone else. And those are the things that you make, you know, well, everybody I know has blonde hair and blue eyes, and please don't be this person, because that, again, I'm clicheing right now, but there are situations where that does make sense. There's if anyone's ever read Across the Universe by Beth Revis, and Across the Universe, everyone, like one of the two main characters has been cryogenically frozen, and she wakes up on this ship that has been generation after generation within this one ship. So they've all, their coloring is very similar. Their you know, their hair, their eyes, their skin, and they walk, and they're all like, they've got brown hair, they're dark skin, and this is this girl that wakes up there and is pale and has red hair, and so she immediately stands out. And yes, she's going to point that out because now she's different from all of the people around her, and so that relationally helps us understand how she looks, if that helped at all. I rambled a little.
I agree with Justine. I just wanted to add really quick. You want your descriptions to happen as organically as they can, in the way that if I'm walking with I like what Justine said about the height difference, because it kind of leaves it up to the reader to be smart and to understand that, oh, then she must be shorter. But if I'm with my friend, I'm not going to comment. I'm not going to be like, I already know her eyes are, say, green, so I'm not going to be like, her eyes are green. You know, like, it's not going to be something in the story, because it's things that the characters themselves kind of already know. So that's the whole organic thing. Like, you don't want the reader to be pulled away from sort of the story and then into description of a character. You kind of just want it woven in, like Justine said. So I think, Ari, it looked like you wanted to say something.
I had many things. I was getting excited. I was trying not to cut in and be like, you know. Two things. One thing I liked with what Justine said is, I think I read Melissa Launders's Alienated series, and there's like a description of the difference between the aliens who live really far away and the people, and she goes into really great descriptions about how Earth is vibrant, but I can never pronounce the planet, Lahir or whatever. It's not very colorful, and so it's they wove it in there. She wove it in there in a way that it just makes you feel like the cultural divide, as opposed to just getting a laundry list of everything. In terms of like what I do is I try to describe the other character kind of through action and through another character's eyes, because everyone is relating with, you know, everyone in the book are kind of interacting. So like, for example, my one character, I know that you've read this one, Maria, she's looking at the one character you love and talking about just the scars that were on him, and like that's really all you get is the scars and him half in moonlight, and that's it. You don't really know what else is there, but you're seeing him through another character's eyes, and you're kind of getting a different vibe as you go through all the characters throughout the book and get kind of how each of them sees him differently, but you're still seeing the same person. I think every writer will do it in a different way. I like lyrical, poetic descriptions. So like I like it when it's all woven in there in an artsy fashion. But I think if you just put it through action, because if you think about it, we're not walking along and saying, oh, my friend, this is Shelley. She's really tall and has blue eyes and blonde hair. And I'm going to go with you, Justine, because it's like the easiest thing to shout out there. And she's really broad-shouldered, and her skin is the color of the sunset or whatever. It just feels really weird, but it feels more natural. You could say the same thing by saying you looked up to your friend, and maybe you were playing with your hair, and yours is really curly, but you admire hers for being short. And there you go. Now you know that the person is tall, and they don't have you know, straight hair, but it's short and it's straight, and now you know the character also has curly hair. So you can kind of add it in there. And like, if you think about how you see other people, how you think about how other people look in relation to yourself, that's a good way to, you know, and people do that all the time. I always look at someone and say, like, mannequins are a perfect example. I wish I looked like the mannequins do. And I could tell you everything about the mannequins, but that, you know, it's such a small comment, but it can tell you a lot about my build versus the mannequins. And you should kind of trust your readers a little bit to have enough sense to kind of know what you're talking about without, yeah, there you go.
I was going to say, though, because what you just said, okay, the mannequin comment also does a really great thing where it reflects also your personality a little bit. So if you're describing, you should always describe based on the personality of the character that's seeing it, because those things are always going to be seen differently. Like you were saying, you have the same picture of the same person rather, but a different picture because different people are looking. You can show a lot about the person who is describing when you go that route, because now we know a little bit about how she views herself, about how she feels about other people, just based on how she looks at the mannequin and goes, I wish I looked at the mannequin like the mannequin does. So it's just very revealing all around. And you want to give as much about the character as you can in as little economic chunks as you can. So that's a good way of doing it. You've now told a lot in just that one sentence.
That's awesome, guys. You know, I think we've you know, like really fleshed out the trope for anybody that's watching, either right now or archived later. And you know, to completely summarize everything, we've said it already. Tropes you hate, tropes you love, keep the tropes you love and reinvent the wheel. So that's what it's all about. This has been a great episode. I don't know about you guys. I had totally so much fun. I could actually keep doing this for like hours on end, but I know people are probably getting completely bored. But next month, on the 21st of April, we are going to launch episode 3, which is all about diversity. And we have an extremely special guest author coming on to talk diversity with us. And we will make that announcement on Twitter in just a couple of minutes. And this debut author's book is launching, I believe, in June through Harlequin Teen. So we are super excited to have her on. And now I'm just going to pass it over to Ari because we have the Scrivener giveaway and she has all the deets.
Hit my button. Can you hear me? Okay. So this month was hard because we had lots and lots of people following us. So I had to go through and scroll. But this month, for those of you who don't know, every month, I think next month is the last month, I'm going to be giving away Scrivener for any writers who want to dabble and try their hand at plotting versus pantsing, or doing both. I'm kind of throwing bits of pantsing into mine because of Maria. I blame her. But this month's winner is Alex Everett. I will put all those details up on Twitter. This person looks... this person, they're a writer, and I'm not sure where they live, but I randomly picked them. And by randomly, I mean I selected. So let's all give it a little clap for Alex Everett. There we go.
That works less well when our mics are all muted. Oh, we're clapping. We're clapping. Ari, you muted your mic now.
Try me.
All right, guys, we're going to say goodbye for now. See you April 21st. This is Devin.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
I think we can unmute now.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
Bye. Bye-bye. So long to you, my friends. I have way too much coffee today. I'm just crazy. You guys need to leave because I'm not going to leave.
Well, you have to take it offline because we're still live.
Sorry.